Good afternoon. I wanted to thank you all very much for joining us for, and I'm going to need some help because I'm going to say pizza and then I'm going to say minister and I need you to go woohoo, okay? Because it is spring break and what's spring break without a woohoo? So thank you very much for joining us today to enjoy some great pizza and the minister. Thank you, and to have a chat. So we're pleased to have a special guest in the house today. Minister Ng is the Minister of Small Business and Export Promotion, which pretty much tells you what she's going to talk about today. And we're also joined by some special guests. We have our Regional Chair, Karen Redmond. We have Raj Saini, who's the newly ordained something for his riding. And, of course, we have Minister Chagger, who is our House Leader. She's in the back. Woohoo! She's actually working in the controls, which is a little terrifying. Don't let her do that. Anyway, we've got a panel we put together today, and they're going to ask them all to come up on stage and join me, and I will introduce them as they go by. First of all, Minister Ng. Minister Ng, of course, is somewhere up here. Maybe put you in the middle or something. The middle would be second chair. Yeah, Bartis just said second chair. And as I mentioned before, she's the minister responsible for small business and export promotion. We also have got Heather Gault. Heather is with P&P Optica. And a bit about Heather's background. Of course, she spent a bunch of time at the company formerly known as RIM, now BlackBerry. Kik, she was with us, and now, of course, she's with P&P. So she brings a really strong understanding of small, medium, and large companies and then how to help them get to where they want to be. We have Matt Stevens, who is known as my brother, although he's not really my brother. This actually goes back a long ways. We've known each other for, oh God, anyway, a long time. And Matt, of course, is with Geotab, formerly Cross Chasm, and thank you, it's good to see you. And of course, Dave Caputo. Dave is the chair of the board of Sandvine. Dave also has had experience with small, medium, and large companies, largely growing them from small to medium to large. And of course, the most recent one was Sandvine. The other interesting thing I think about Dave is that he was part of what was known, or what is known as the Pickstream Mafia. We talk about the PayPal Mafia in the Valley and how it's spun out all kinds of great companies like LinkedIn, et cetera. And we forget that we've got our own version in this community. I think there's 38 or 40 companies now that have spun out. And I think, Matt, didn't you work as a co-op or something at Sandvine at one point in time? Basically. So there we go. The circle is complete. Anyway, please join me in welcoming our panel. So I'm going to do our best not to moderate because I think that's always more fun, but I do have a couple of notes here.
I can't touch the floor.
It's okay. Her feet don't touch the floor. It's okay. Note to self. So I guess there's a few things that we wanted to talk about today. We certainly wanted to talk about scaling businesses, and we wanted to talk about international sales and the importance of that. But Minister Ng, why don't we start with you? Why are you here? What is your quest?
So as the Minister for Small Business and Export Promotion, I tell businesses across the country, it's my job to help you start up. It's my job to help you scale up. It's my job to help you access the global marketplace. And it's also my job to make sure that we have an environment that is competitive for small businesses to operate in. So cutting taxes for small business to 9% is something our government has done. And I'll get into this a little further, but opening up global marketplaces through the many trade agreements that we have negotiated so that our Canadian businesses can grow and grow through exporting, because around the world, they're literally, there's no company I've met yet in this job that doesn't like one thing, and I bet you guys will agree, and you gal. More than that, customers.
Well, from which
Customers.
comes money, yes.
Customers comes with money. So, so my job is to help you start up, scale up, and access new markets. But I actually, before we do this, I need to give a shout out to that woman back there. Minister Chagger. Barter Chagger was the Minister of Small Business before me. So, so you have a fabulous advocate here working for you in the Waterloo region. So shout out to her. She just wants to hide back there, but she's not getting away with that.
And who knew she was a DJ in her youth? But, Heather, what do you think about that? About small
Access to
business
customers?
exports. What is it we need to be doing in Canada that we're not doing to make us more competitive?
So it's a great question. I think access to customers, Communitech, I know the model is customers, capital, and talent, right? And those are really key, and customers drives it all. So if we look at our programs that Communitech runs and some of the things our companies see, we focus on that sales model. And for a lot of the smaller companies especially, figuring out how to get into a market other than the US is overwhelming, right? It's really hard. So we understand how to get into that first international market, but figuring out how to access the market in the first place, how to find the money to get there and get home again, how to close those deals when we don't necessarily know the culture, we don't have an entity there. If we're trying to ship in hardware, all of those things become really complex. And we see over and over again that companies just end up narrowing their focus because they can't see the path to get into that new market and be successful.
Can I answer that?
Yes. My job is almost done here.
You're absolutely right. It's why the government has a trade diversification strategy. It's why we are working with you and with Communitech exactly to do that. I'll just share a stat. Actually, in fact, I'll ask the room. So 99% of our businesses in this country are small and medium-sized businesses. What percentage do you think we export today? There's no wrong answer, by the way. Just
8, 13.
30? 12%. And of that 12%, 70% of it goes to the US.
Right.
And yet, we have access to 60% of the world's economy. So you're absolutely right, and we can talk more about what we're doing to help that.
That'd be great.
So, Dave, you built some companies that had some exports. Were there pain points along the way? Is there stuff that worked that didn't work? What was your experience at sort of growing Sandvine from a startup to a global player?
Well, actually, if I could start with something slightly different, Ian, I want to think of for helping the companies that are here in this room. Certainly, the federal government becoming a customer for all of them would probably be the number one thing that might help them. Mm-hmm. But I think a close number two for the companies here in this room is you guys have been an incredible supporter of Communitech, and I think as the token Communitech board member up here, let me thank you for the support that you've given. It actually makes this space possible and makes this event actually possible. And so to the extent that you continue to support Communitech, and dare I say, support it even more than you've ever supported it, it will help every single one of these companies here become more successful. And then on the exporting thing in particular, both Pickstream and Sandvine were very, very successful companies that scaled up, and they both exited for over $500 million. Export to the United States was really important, but so was our ability to build up in other places. And I think there's a model to make it significantly easier to export. Communitech has some ideas, and we'd love to share them with you. But very specifically, Pickstream was a Newbridge affiliate, for those who remember Newbridge Networks way back when. Sure. When we wanted to hire someone, a salesperson anywhere else in the world, say we wanted to enter Mexico. Oh, Newbridge had an office in Mexico City. That office could actually hire the salesperson, and we would just pay Newbridge to pay them, and they would do the benefits, and they would provide the space and stuff like that. We were able to scale our global sales significantly quicker than we would have otherwise, and it would be great if the federal government had a model like that just enabled us to just immediately hire in another country salespeople and sales support folks so we could attack that market.
I would add actually to what Dave said. When I was working at BlackBerry and we were going overseas, we used the embassies significantly as a point into the market, and they were hugely helpful in those first few steps. But even with all the resources we had on the table from a corporate perspective, getting into a new market with the product was really difficult. And so to add to that idea of making it easier to hire internationally and bring the revenue back to Canada, I'd love to see us find ways to make it easier to close the customer and actually bring whatever it is we're shipping into those new markets as well. Those are huge challenges for a small company.
That's great ideas. I mean, and we're very open to to any inputs and any ideas, particularly where they've already had a proven track record of being successful. I'm going to give a shout out to what you already have here and what we've just built better capacity by putting more investments into. I call the following the greatest sales force that Canada has around the world. The Canadian Trade Commissioner Service. Anybody here use them? Fantastic. You have in-house here at Communitech a couple of people who are Canadian Trade Commissioners, but they operate in 161 countries. We have just added more trade commissioners here domestically, so that someone said to me earlier, it's about helping you with sort of pre-flight before you board that flight. So helping you here to get export ready, to get yourself as ready as you can before you leave and go into the international marketplace. But when you get into that international marketplace, we have them around the world. They understand the market, they understand the local customers, they understand the issues around what you're going to have to deal with as a company into that new market and help you navigate. But I love the idea about about a greater presence in that market that actually allows you to bring to sort of bring talent on board. We've done something. Our colleague, the immigration minister, has put forward. We have a new program called Global Skills. Global Skills brings talent the other way because you have expertise elsewhere that you want in your company here, and you can now get them here in 2 weeks. That is huge because the data that we've seen, the very early data, you get that expertise in here quickly like that, it helps you also expand almost exponentially because you've brought that high-skilled talent with an understanding of the other marketplace right here in-house into your shop here in Canada. So the trade diversification strategy is a $1.1 billion investment. So anything we can learn, we will. And I agree with you around Communitech and the national network that you have. And our job is to make sure that we are creating the right, we're putting the right investments out there closest to those who work with the entrepreneurs, because what we care about are your outcomes, which is your growth.
Matt.
Well, I think I was actually going to give kudos to the Trade Commissioner Service.
Yes.
So Minister Ng beat me to it, which is great. It is a service that we didn't make use of for the first couple of years, and as soon as we started making use of it, we started really kicking ourselves that we hadn't before.
Because it's free.
It's free, easy, they get you in front of who you need to get into. When we went to Japan, they brought a translator.
Yes.
Like, it just makes it so easy to do work abroad, and I was okay that no one else was using it because it meant more resources for us, but broadly, if you're not using the Trade Commissioner Service, you're missing out. I do think it would be dramatically augmented by what Dave mentioned and what Heather supported, is, when we were 40 people here doing direct sales at a KW, we wanted to set up an office in Europe, but it was just, there were so many hurdles. And if we could reduce the ability for us to have a rep in Germany or in UK physically present to also tag team with the Trade Commissioner Service, that would have been immensely helpful. Now we're 600 people, mainly between Waterloo and Oakville, and we have 10 international sales offices. So now I'm feeling the benefit of having, the presence in market, and it is phenomenal. And I could just imagine what we could have done in advance. The one thing I will just comment is I think there is also an opportunity here, and we were very fortunate because Communitech drilled it into us from day one, is that we were a day one global company. Yeah. And I think that really is a necessary focus, especially for a tech company, that who cares if you're best in Ontario? It really is irrelevant. Like, you're playing on global stakes, and so you better be best in the world at what you do.
And I'm meeting companies all across the country that has that ethos, and it's why I have the portfolio, which includes export promotion, so that companies understand that there really are there are robust markets, and you're going to have the support of of not only us at the federal level, but we're working with with organizations like Communitech. We're working with other levels of government as well, so that we can truly support support our entrepreneurs. So absolutely, growing global is where we're going. Artish.
So then why, I put this to the panel, why don't we have more companies exporting? Why, or is, it obviously was something you thought about out of the gate. You were a global micronational, I think you used to call yourself. What do you think is getting in the way of people thinking about selling internationally?
Well, we have the largest economy right next door, and so I think everyone does think of the United States next. But after that, it becomes a huge debate and discussion to go anywhere else. Because you generally have to create a permanent entity, you have to do a tax return, there's all the things that you register for in Canada you have to do in those countries, you have to get a benefits provider. There's just a lot of work that you think, well, why wouldn't I just put that effort into the US? But anyone who's been paying attention these past couple of years, the relationship with the United States and Canada and the United States and everybody has become tenuous. And so figuring out how to sell to some of our other more aligned countries around the world, I think is good for those other countries, and it's also good for us.
And as I may or may not correctly recall, there were key markets in Asia that played a significant role in the history of Sandvine.
Yeah, certainly we were global from day one, and all throughout Europe, we I'm sure ended up in, I don't know, probably 60 or 70 countries selling our products. It was wherever the internet was, and it was everywhere, so.
I think the other thing I would add to that, Ian, is that when you build something scalable and repeatable in Canada, it's relatively easy to take scalable and repeatable to the US. It's a lot harder to think about what would be scalable and repeatable in an Asian environment, in a European environment, or in a Latin American environment. And so there's barriers there just to kind of imagining. And not a lot of great stories of success. Sandvine is one, there are some others, but they tend to be much bigger companies than the ones that we see all the time. And while they may have ambitions to get there, the roadway is really not clear, and it's definitely not paved.
And this is what we need to change. I talk about working together hand in hand with my colleague Minister Carr, who has responsible for trade diversification. I describe it like this. I say, Jim opens the doors and creates those bridges because he is out there around the world securing these trade agreements. We have a trade agreement with the European bloc through CETA. We have a trade agreement with Pacific Rim nations through CETA or through CPTPP. We are working on more trade agreements with Latin America. We're doing negotiations with the ASEAN countries. We have all of this access, which actually provides that framework. So you're not going in there and sort of wondering, how do I sort of work through this? We've actually spent time as a government putting together a trade framework that actually has a whole bunch of terms in there that gives you preferred access, but also gives you, sort of the rules of the game, if you will. So why do we only have 12% exporting today and 70% to the US? So you're absolutely right. We have access to these open markets. So I say, his job is to open those doors, and my job is to hold the hands of the SMEs and walk them through the door, help them cross that bridge, because we need that foot traffic across that bridge. So developing programs that help more companies become more export ready. Creating, accelerate. We have tech hubs in three places in the world, in Japan, in Hong Kong, in India. We are, through the trade diversification strategy, we actually have just increased investment in them, so we're adding their presence. So it's going, so that in addition to the Trade Commissioner Service, having EDC, which is Export Development Canada, underwriting things like currency fluctuations or insurance, giving you insurance as you're doing the export, and then working together with the Business Development Bank here in Canada. It's this sort of three-legged stool that we're putting together at the federal level, so that we can provide the best support we possibly can. So it's the beginning, but I say this. Canada is known as a trading country. We are not yet a country of traders, but we're going to change that.
Awesome. Shifting gears a bit, we do hear that there are some challenges around small business accessing capital, growth capital, capital at various stages. Just wondering if I could open that up to anyone who wants to speak to that.
You keep looking at me. You've been quiet, Matt. You go for it.
Matt.
Well, I think this is so. We mainly bootstrapped, and as Fleet Karma, Cross Chasm, and Geotab mainly bootstrapped. So the little bit of investment we got wasn't incredibly hard, and I don't mean that to sound braggadocious, but it wasn't a big challenge for us. But I will say part of the reason why we were able to minimize our capital raise was we were able to get customers quickly, and kudos to the government. We were very fortunate that the federal government was a customer of ours quite early. So I would say I'm probably not the best person to answer capital, but I will give kudos for the government of being a customer early, which reduced our requirement for capital.
And I would take two perspectives. One is I agree with Matt on the buy local, so having the federal government as a customer and making that buying process as easy as possible for the government so that a small company trying to get revenue from the government can do it easily. The other thing that we see is there's a murky middle. So there's great support for the earliest stages. And I know there's some companies in the room here who've benefited from those very early stage company programs. And I think there's really good support once you've hit big time, right? And so when you're showing material revenue, material customer growth, there's a lot of support. There's an awfully long road in the middle, and that becomes a challenge for a company trying to get access to any kind of capital, whether it's venture capital, government support, banks, any of them. PNP's in that spot now where we're starting to see great customer traction. We need to grow as an organization, but we are looking in every corner to try and find capital, and it's tough.
Yeah.
So that's a real consideration, I think.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, I hear it all the time, and it's precisely why I actually have someone working on this very thing, that thing being scale up. I mean, the government of Canada, had 6 economic tables, right? 6 economic tables in various sectors looking at real high growth opportunities. Every single table, each table came up with, a number of recommendations, but there was one common recommendation amongst all of them. Help our companies scale up, grow, so that Canadian companies can own the podium. Yeah. So I've got someone looking at that very issue right now. But I'll make a plug for female entrepreneurs because I have a mandate given to me by the Prime Minister to double the number of female entrepreneurs in this country by 2025. Yes. And today only 16% of our Canadian small and medium-sized companies are either female-led or female-owned, like 16%. And yet, we know, because the studies tell us, we can add up to $150 billion to the Canadian GDP, incremental GDP, in that same period of time, just simply by adding women entrepreneurs. And I did see something on Twitter yesterday, so it must be accurate, that in the UK, this is what the Twitter said. But in the UK, $326 billion to their GDP by women's economic empowerment. So we've done some things. I mean, it's a $2 billion investment that we've made as a government. 1.6 billion of that is capital. And there's a 200, and then there's some additional capital that's venture capital because we have to do better. We've had to do better. Mm-hmm. So we've injected about $450 million into the venture capital system so that money could be leveraged to then grow and then invest into women-led companies. And a piece of that is very deliberately focused on women in tech, women in international trade. There's a lot more to do for sure, and there's a lot more to do around scale up and access to capital and working capital in particular. But we're looking at that because we want to be able to crack that nut. So those who have bright ideas to help us do that, please feel free to get in touch.
I'll give you one.
Yes, please.
Yeah,
No.
I have way too many opinions.
No,
sorry,
it's
Ian.
great.
So the global skills visa, you talked
Yes.
about it earlier, and we've got that
Yeah.
time period down to
Yeah.
2 weeks.
Yeah.
What I hear from a lot of the entrepreneurs working here at Communitech is the access to those funds, whether it's an early stage or a later
Yeah.
stage, the application process is extremely long. And for some of those companies, they can't wait.
Yeah.
You know, if they're asking for that capital, it's because they've got an immediate customer
Yeah.
opportunity, an immediate employing opportunity, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But we can't have a 12 or 24-week wait period to get access. And it can't take us months to figure out what funds to try and apply for.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. I mean, and you know, in the months that I've been in this portfolio, I've literally traveled the country. And if there's a consistent theme aside from getting access to capital, that's it. I was actually just in a roundtable with a number of female founders who said exactly the same thing. So innovation.canada.ca is the one window portal that we have created with the intention that every company is different. Go through there and it'll, you know, you answer a dozen questions, no more than a dozen, and it's very simple. And it's going to give you then sort of, you know, here's the array of supports that are available to you. But I would say this, it gives you the array of, but then you still have to fill out the forms. Right. So there is work that we need to do. So I hear that, and I won't belabor it because, but know that I've heard it, and we're going to go back and try to fix it. You know, we've got people we've got people sort of doing these design jams that's coming out to kick the tires on some of these things that we put out there, so that we get a practical view of, like a practical feedback of what's not working and how do we change to improve it. So we're very committed to doing that. Government's big, so, you know, so we're going to try to be agile. I often say, you know, I mean, Bardish did this before me, but, you know, we bring the small business lens to the cabinet table and to government. That's our job. That's my job. So what we do, we are going to do it with a sensitivity, you know, to an entrepreneur, to a small business. I mean, I grew up in a small business, so I know that there's not a lot of time. And the little time you have, you kind of need to sleep. So, you know.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And I just love the number, the $1.5 billion number. And we were thrilled through the support that you provided Communitech for us to be able to launch all of our women in tech programs, including Fierce Founders. It really are making a difference. So thank you for that. We're going to actually open it up for questions right now. Kristen is standing with a cube that has a goat on it. If anyone would like to ask a question. Oh, there's one right behind you.
Love it, a cube with a goat.
Sure. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Minister. I actually have a question which is kind of specific to our industry. So I'm in the clean tech area, and one problem, for example, we come across, and you kind of touch on that, we have a different runway. We have a different way of actually going into business. And we have that problem of the gap time. So everyone looks for the next product coming out, and everyone is expecting that to be out within 6 months. And that's not how we do it, and that's a lot of programs right now are limited in that way. And in Ontario, we have the problem because the Conservative government basically canceled every program that was to do with clean tech. So I'm just wondering if you have any plan at the federal level for this kind of, for companies who are in longer roads, more engineering focus, something that have product for long term.
Yeah, we do. Clean tech and is directly tied to our government. It's one of the things that our government is heavily supportive and invested in, because it's where it's very much part of our climate plan. So we just in terms of capital that we've just announced, and we haven't rolled it out yet, because we're working through sort of how to do that. We know that you have a longer shelf, like you have a longer development cycle, and you're going to need funding that's going to need to last you for a little longer period than anybody else. And we don't want you in a situation where you've got to kind of come out too early because you just won't be successful. So know that we know that, and sort of that next fund that's coming out, it's a $50 million fund for clean tech. But we are looking at it with a view of making sure that in its design, it considers what you just said, which is that longer runway that you need just by the very definition, just by the very nature of your business. So, so stay tuned for that.
We have another question.
So you mentioned a couple of people mentioned the doing business with the government. One of the things that I find very useful is that first customer. It's not about the money, it's about the feedback loop. So a couple of years ago, they launched the Built in Canada Innovation Program, which I think is an excellent strategy. Unfortunately, it's a bit of a mystery because A, we can't suggest things into it. It does simplify the application process or the ability to do business, but is there any thought to making more but smaller challenges available rather than to wait for that one that might happen 1 month and find it?
Yeah, we, the Built in Canada, BCIP, I'm sorry, my brain is wired to acronyms, I'm sorry, because I work in government. Yes, so Built in Canada Innovation. No, it's, that program is very, very oversubscribed, which means that we put challenges out there, and there's a lot of great sort of, a lot of great solutions, potential solutions that we could be looking at. But I would say to you that that it has it has gotten caught up a little bit because we've had such an oversubscription of it. So we put we put a series of challenges out there, and we've got a number of companies working in. We bottlenecked a little bit because we had such an overwhelming reply. So now we've kind of retooled it a little bit, and we're going to come back out so that we can get a little bit more practical. So the way I sort of think about government, and I think we have to think of it this way too, especially in this space, we too pivot and learn too, because we have to. And as government, that's not our DNA. It's never been our DNA. But I would say, a shout out to the great people who work, in our system. We try, we're learning, and in fact, we're learning from you. So stay tuned and look forward to more BCIP. So we're doing more, and when we've learned from sort of that first tranche, and hopefully when we come out, it won't be as gnarly as it's been.
We're super close to being out of time, but before we head out, I'm just going to ask Heather and Matt and Dave to share what is one thing that would make your life easier, or one thing that the government should be thinking about doing that would significantly increase the success of small businesses growing and also selling internationally? I'll start at the end.
I'm going to take a side track that we haven't covered yet, which is around talent. So we've talked about customers and capital. We haven't talked as much about people. And I think, the Global Skills Visa had an enormous impact. We all, I think, would agree on that. And I think if we looked around the room, we'd see lots of nodding heads. So we need to think about what else can we do in the short term. I also think we need to think long term. And so I know that education, for example, is managed at the provincial level. I think the federal government needs to think about what they can do as well. I have 2 little girls, they're 10 and 13, and I feel like they've almost already missed the window to start learning how to code and start learning about what technology is going to do in their lives when they grow up. So I bring them here, they were here this morning, but not every kid has that advantage, and I think we need to make sure they all do.
I was going to say almost the exact same thing.
You keep getting scooped.
I know.
You're scooped by the women.
I know. Well, what is this? I'm the husband of a female entrepreneur. I have two daughters. I'm the dad to 2 young women. So I have a very personal interest. But professionally, Geotab, we were 300 people at the start of 2018. We're 620 people now. We do massive amount of export. But more importantly, we have 135 job openings at this moment between Kitchener and Waterloo. We have about 200 globally, 135 between here and Oakville. Most of those are STEM. And we are having a real tough time getting enough really STEM talented people. And we need to graduate more people in the STEM fields. And I strongly believe that one of the critical ways for us to do that is to have more female representation in STEM. And I realize it's provincial jurisdiction, but there has to be a federal role there.
Yes.
And so, ditto to what Heather said.
High five.
One thing. The government can only do one thing. It does many, many things. You look at all the programs in your portfolio, and people want easier access to capital. Let me break something to you. it's always going to be difficult to raise capital. You have to have a really good team. You have to have a really good idea. You need to be executing on that. The government will throw $500 million into more venture capital, and hopefully it'll get out there, but it's always going to be difficult. It's always going to be hard to hire really good talent. They've just made it that in 2 weeks you could find the greatest talent in Canada, and you could bring it here very quickly. That's a distinct advantage Canada has right now. Education should be better. Let's make it better, and let's get people coding in kindergarten, and that would be excellent. Even how many people here are running a business or in a business with less than 500 employees? Everybody. Well, the tax rate is now 9% for these businesses here in Canada. So make sure your investors understand that. That'll help you raise money. It's more money that you get to reinvest in your business. And so the one thing you should do is support Communitech.
So on coding, we have put out, an initiative that's going to get 1 million kids learning how to code with the emphasis on girls. Awesome. So I think that's a downstream thing because obviously, our kindergarten girls or, our grade, our young girls, they're going to get the benefit of this coding. And when they get to a point where they're making those curriculum choices in STEM, it's going to be a no-brainer. Like, we're not going to have those conversations. I hope we're not going to have those conversations. So it is an investment we've already made, and we're going to see that down the road. But in the meantime, creating 900,000 jobs in the last 3 years, having the lowest unemployment rate, it's fabulous. Having a 10-year low on the poverty rate is something that we're so proud of. But what does it mean? It actually means skill shortage. So we are, all of us, Raj, Vardish, myself, all of us around the table are working and figuring out how we solve and crack this nut because, in addition to capital, in addition to the ability, getting the right resources to go global and everything else, the other thing that I hear about is getting the right talent so that we could really fuel that growth that our Canadian companies are looking for. So we're hearing all those things. So know that we got your back. We're trying to work as hard as we can.
Wonderful. So join me in thanking Minister for visiting and for the great panel. And thank you all very much for joining us here today. Thank you.